afternoon. It's Thursday, April 21st. I'm Ariel Sullivan. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Israel is supplying Jordan and Egypt with intelligence to assist them in fighting against the Islamic State, a senior IDF officer has revealed, describing cooperation between the countries as unprecedented. Speaking at a press conference to the foreign press, Deputy Chief of Staff Major General Yair Golan noted the exchange of information has proven a good starting point to strengthen ties between the countries. Despite the large influx of refugees from Syria and Iraq, Jordan remains stable, but is deeply concerned over the presence of ISIS in its towns and cities. Egypt, which is facing political chaos and economic struggles, presents a greater challenge, he said. Golan also issued a stern warning to Hezbollah, which he has estimated to have 100,000 rockets in its arsenal. The general said any future war between the Shiite group and Israel will unleash devastating damage in Lebanon.
Egypt fights the Islamic State in the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan is terrifying by the presence of the Islamic State in Jordan cities and towns, and we try to work with them in order to contribute something to their security, mainly by providing our intelligence. And you do know that while fighting all sorts of insurgency, intelligence is the most important element in the whole system. My impression is that Jordan is stable. And I think that the Jordanians do understand their challenges, and they do understand what has to be done, and they work hard in order to make it come true. I'm quite optimistic about the future of Egypt. But I think that we are going to experience, or they are going to experience, crisis along the way.
In the wake of the Jerusalem bus bombing earlier this week, and amid concerns of an escalation in violence, thousands of police and border police, including undercover and anti-terror units, will be deployed throughout the capital and across the country over the Passover holiday, with emphasis on Jerusalem's Old City. Tens of thousands of Jewish worshippers are expected to pray at the Western Wall, particularly next week at the Birkat Kohanim, or the priestly blessing service. Christians are also expected to throng to the Old City to attend the ceremony of the Holy Fire in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the Christian Quarter on Saturday. Israel's security forces will continue to operate in the West Bank areas under Palestinian control in accordance with operational needs, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced following a security cabinet discussion yesterday. The Palestinian Authority recently demanded Israel halt all its operations and refrain from entering areas under its control. In recent months, Israeli and Palestinian security officials have been discussing a change in the status quo. The Palestinian Authority reportedly rejected an Israeli offer to cease operations in two West Bank cities, Ramallah and Jericho, with the possibility of extending to other cities in accordance with security evaluations. An unnamed Israeli security official told the Haaretz newspaper earlier this week that the sides are now discussing a temporary limit on IDF activities in all Palestinian cities, with an increased responsibility for Palestinian security services. Hamas has claimed responsibility for the bus bombing in Jerusalem earlier this week and confirmed that the unidentified person who died yesterday from injuries sustained in the blast was 19-year-old Hamas member Adel Hamid Abu Sroor, a resident of the Aida refugee camp near Bethlehem. A gag order has been imposed on the ongoing investigation. However, Abu Sroor's father was arrested by security forces. Shoham Ruvio, a spokeswoman at the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, confirmed that Abu Sroor, who lost both legs in the explosion, died last night. Ruvio added that from the 21 people injured in Monday's bombing, 2 remain in hospital. Protesters of Abu Sroor declaring him a martyr were hung up in the camp last night as residents handed out sweets celebrating the fact that he had become a martyr. In some West Bank cities, Palestinians conducted solidarity rallies. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Moscow this morning for a summit meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Here to discuss and examine the issues will be IBA political correspondent Kalev Ben David.
Thank you, Aryeh. Today marks the third meeting between Netanyahu and Putin over the past 7 months, reflecting the heightened role Russia is playing in the region since it sent troops to Syria to help Bashar Assad fight against the rebels. Joining Netanyahu in Moscow are Immigrant Absorption Minister Zev Elkin, who was born in Ukraine and will act as interpreter, National Security Council head Avril Bar Yosef, and Air Force Commander Major General Amir Eshel. Eshel's participation will be crucial, as the talks will focus on security coordination on Syria and the transfer underway of the Russian-made S-300 missile system to Iran, a sale Israel has been trying to prevent. Also on the agenda is the future of the Israeli-held Golan Heights. After reports last week that a Russian and American-backed peace plan for Syria would include a statement that the territory will eventually revert back to Syrian control, Netanyahu sent a strong message in reply by holding this week's cabinet meeting in the Golan, which Israel annexed in 1981, and declaring the area will remain in Israeli hands. Netanyahu will also seek reassurances from Putin that the Syrian side of the Golan will not become a staging ground for attacks on Israel by terrorist groups, and that advanced weapons will not be transferred from Syria to Hezbollah. The Prime Minister finally acknowledged last week that Israel had taken military action in Syria to prevent such transfers. And if Putin cannot use his influence in Syria to stop the arms shipments, Israel will surely act again. Aryeh?
Thanks, Kalev. And political tensions flared within the government this week after Prime Minister Netanyahu threatened to fire Education Minister Naftali Bennett at this week's Security Cabinet meeting. IBA's Kalev Ben-David looks at the long simmering tensions between the two.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Education Minister Naftali Bennett have often clashed on security issues, with Bennett, whose Jewish Home Party draws much of its support from the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, usually arguing for the government to take tougher measures against the Palestinians. Their latest dispute, according to leaked reports from this week's meeting of the Security Cabinet, came after Bennett insisted on an immediate discussion of Israeli security operations in those areas of the West Bank under Palestinian Authority control. After arguing over the meeting's agenda, Netanyahu reportedly warned Bennett that if he did not back down, the Prime Minister would fire him from the cabinet. Netanyahu would find it politically difficult to follow through on his threat, as none of the opposition party leaders has indicated a willingness to join his government, and the coalition would collapse without the support of Bennett's Jewish Home faction. So with both Netanyahu and Bennett vying for the leadership of the nationalist camp, and the coveted title of Mr. Security, it is only a matter of time before this political rivalry again boils over. Kalev Ben-David for IBA News.
It's Thursday, and joining us now in the studio to shed some light on the top news stories of the week is Amot Sasael, a senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post and the Dow Jones Market Watch. So, Amot, it's quite obvious that the Prime Minister cannot fire Naftali Bennett because of the coalition problems. Why is Bennett provoking the Prime Minister?
Bennett has a strategy, which is to out Netanyahu, and he's trying to fashion himself to the general right wing as Netanyahu's natural successor, and within the right wing to the more hardline parts of that electorate as its ultimate choice. It is a position for which he's vying also with Avigdor Lieberman, and I think that it is a non-starter as far as the electorate is concerned, certainly as far as the timing is concerned, and Bennett is basically defying the gravity of Israeli politics by seeking a position that would potentially lead the entire right wing from his own location in the national religious camp. He continues to deny the past, whereby that electorate only had that much of the political map, and he's trying to redraw the map, I think, with very small chances of success.
The Golan Heights. This week, the cabinet held a meeting up there, and the Prime Minister said this will remain forever in Israel's hands. But both the United States and the European Union have blasted this, and even Syrian President Bashar Assad insisted the Golan Heights must be returned to Syria under any peace accord reached to end the conflict there. So how serious are these threats?
Well, never mind the threats. I try to understand the wisdom of the statement, or at least its timing. I don't think it was wise to tinker with Israel was very successfully keeping its neutrality vis-a-vis the entire Syrian very complex civil war, and this, while it does not violate that policy, it nevertheless challenges it. And in terms of Israel's claims for the Golan, such declarations always are merely verbal, and they do not change anything from Israel's view for the better down in the field, and at the same time they do provoke all kinds of very obvious responders like the ones we met this week. I didn't think Netanyahu's cause was furthered by this declaration.
Was it some sort of internal consumption?
No, I think there was wisdom there, but it proved to have had the bad result that Netanyahu hoped to not see. Namely, he was hoping to see that you can say something against the backdrop of today's Syrian mess about the Golan and get away with it. What he learned was that you couldn't.
This week, the Shin Bet announced that they broke or they captured a Jewish terror cell. How significant is that?
The impression we get is that the people apprehended themselves don't look lethal or serious. However, what I think is significant is the effort that produces these arrests. The initial attitude in the Israeli security services several years ago, when people began warning that Jewish terror is much more threatening than usually suggested, the Shabak's, the Shin Bet's answer was generally, not publicly, but if I'm not mistaken, behind the scenes, what they were saying was that allocating resources for this Jewish challenge would come at the expense of much more urgent and crucial non-Jewish challenges. Now we see that the Jewish challenge is being taken in the security service very, very seriously, and the reason is what happened with Duma, what later happened on Temple Mount. They understand that, anecdotal as these youngsters may seem, they are in a position to set big fires and ones that Israel by no means wants to see.
Let's move to economics. The Intel Corporation around the world said they're going to be cutting staff by 10%. Israel has a very large Intel Corporation. How worried and concerned should they be for layoffs?
Well, it seems that the big chunk of Intel presence in Israel, the plant in Kiryat Gat, is not targeted as part of this massive cutback. Moreover, Israel for Intel is too much a strategic investment in order for it to threaten its future. Then again, Israel might be on the fringes of this massive cutback. And having said all this, we should bear in mind that Israel's general high-tech performance and what it is distinguished for is not the large-scale Nokia type of labor-intensive plant that produces many items of the same thing. Israel's advantage and Israel's main distinction in terms of the global high-tech industry is the startup, and Intel is an exception in this regard.
You think there's some kind of promise made that they wouldn't take
Oh, there is one. It's formal, and Intel has made plain yesterday that it intends to abide by its agreements with Israel. The basis of Intel's relationship with Israel is a capital aid agreement whereby they got some very, very generous tax breaks, and in turn for that, Kiryat Gat got thousands of jobs, and this deal is going to remain intact.
Amol Tassel, always a pleasure to have your insight. Thanks for joining IBA
Thank
News.
you, Artie.
The U.S. Army has successfully tested an Iron Dome interceptor missile against a drone target. The Rafael Advanced Defense Systems Company has announced that it was the first time that a trial of the Iron Dome was held on U.S. soil. The U.S. Army fired the Tamir interceptor at a target drone, detecting, striking, and destroying it. The trial was conducted with the cooperation of American defense contractor Raytheon. A statement issued by Rafael said ahead of the launch, special adaptations were made to the Iron Dome interceptor to fit into the launcher. The Passover holiday begins tomorrow, and Jews around the world have been making their last-minute preparations for the week-long holiday. Here's what's going on in Israel. Jerusalem is getting ready for Passover. The smell of matzah is wafting out of the bakeries. Hot items are legumes for those who eat them. And there is a new song for the holiday. Immersing pots and pans and dishes into barrels of boiling water. It's a Passover ritual to totally cleanse them of any traces of leavened crumbs known as chametz. In Jerusalem's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, lines were forming around these so-called boiling stations as residents did their last-minute cleaning before the holiday. These are the days when the streets of the Geula neighborhood of Jerusalem are filled with shoppers looking for that right tablecloth for the holiday Seder. In the kitchens, meals are already being prepared. Even in the country's prisons, preparations are being made for Passover. Jewish, Muslim, and Christian prisoners all pitched in with the Passover cleaning, and for some, the holiday of emancipation from slavery took on a special meaning. And for those celebrating their freedom by traveling abroad, the airport authority today warned of possible delays due to radio interference coming from the Palestinian Authority. Some 70,000 passengers are expected to pass through Ben Gurion today. A moment before Passover, and the president's residence invited over a number of lone women soldiers who are serving in the IDF and have no families in the country. Nahama, the wife of President Rivlins, gathered them to thank them for their service and then had a surprise for them. They had secretly brought their parents to the country, and they had a joyous reunion in Jerusalem. The Herzl Brewery in Jerusalem says it has produced a craft beer using a recipe that dates back to the time of Jesus 2,000 years ago. The brewery owner says he used wheat that was identified by Tel Aviv University as the strain used in the Holy Land back then. After receiving several kilos of wheat, the brewery produced some 20 liters. Now only one bottle is left, and there are no plans to turn more water into beer.
The historians, they say that beer is coming from around this area of the world, from the Middle East area, Mesopotamia, and what was there back then. The rumor mentions that it moved back to Europe when the Romans came with the wine that also grew up here, and somehow it came, only the wine stayed here and the beer kind of made into a folk's drink in Europe. The flavor was surprising. This is something that we never expected. We got like this kind of a red fruit, kind of a raspberry flavor, and there's no fruit additions into it, and it's only because of the grains we used.
And for our British viewers, England's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, is celebrating her 90th birthday today. Leaders across the world congratulated the British monarch, including former President Shimon Peres. Tonight, the Queen will light one of 90 beacons displayed in her honor. Earlier today, she went on a walkabout near her main residence in Windsor to meet with well-wishers and lining the streets. Throughout her reign, she has served over 12 prime ministers. Stock talk now, and it was a day of mixed trading on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, while the shekel was also mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the late afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team says the pleasant temperatures will continue with maybe a slight drop in Passover weekend temperatures. Here are the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's it for this broadcast of IBA News. Please join us again on Sunday to get the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Ariel O'Sullivan, wishing you all a great weekend, happy and kosher Passover, and shalom from Jerusalem.